Hi, I'm Lauren.
Hi, I'm Jen.
And this is Build Order. We explore why certain things grow in certain cities. And today we're talking about Austin, not just where it's been, but what actually compounds here over time. There's a narrative that the city changed overnight starting in 2020. And we want to explore whether that's true or whether something that's longer running is playing out. So this is a conversation about growth, institutions, culture, and what makes the city stick.
Can't wait to get started.
The first thing I really wanted to start with was there's really this myth, pervasive myth in Austin that everyone came here from California in 2020 during COVID and stayed and, ruined the city. Don't California my Texas. But that's not true. And it's not entirely true. There's certain elements of truth, like every myth, and there's certain things that are just patently false. So let's talk about what went right. People are right about growth. So growth is slowing. It's been 2% over 2020 to 2024, but this is still the fourth fastest growing MSA in the nation. And 70% of the growth from 2011 to 21 has been migration. So a lot of truth to that statement. People are also right about California. Somewhat. So if you look at the counties that have grown here and where people have where people have moved from truly, I mean, you're looking at Los Angeles, you're looking at San Mateo, Santa Clara.
That's so interesting. I wouldn't have pegged. I don't know anyone from San Mateo or Santa Clara here. I do know some LA folks.
Yeah. So
anyway, anecdotally.
All the Californians. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also been really big flows from other cities in Texas. So Harris County topped the list from 2017 to 2021, which, I know you're familiar with Harris County.
Very familiar. I moved here from Harris County back in the day.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, so we're talking about Houston here. So lots of Texas migration to Austin. So that's what is true about, migration. We're seeing a lot of growth from other parts of the country, and we're also seeing a lot of people who've moved here from California.
But what about New York? I mean, you're a New Yorker moved here.
That's right. We're kind of like a hidden cohort that doesn't appear as much in the data. But yeah, tons of New Yorkers have moved to Texas, and it's been a popular destination, one of the fastest growing states in the country, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, it's so interesting. I would have pegged that as being higher than necessarily even in-state migration. Maybe it's just my circle.
Oh, yeah.
My inner circle, somehow I attract New Yorkers, I guess. But that's interesting. Good to know. All right.
Yeah. So that's what's true. So, what's not true about the myth? And I think this is where, when you look into the data, it gets really interesting. So what many people under account for, I think, is that Austin was growing well before 2020. So if you look at the 2020 census and you look from 2010 to 20, it was the fastest growing metro area in the US over that decade. And the population grew by 33% in that period. So, there's this longer growth story that people don't always account for when they start talking about the COVID years.
I believe that. I moved here in 2015? No, 2013. So I'm part of that early shift. And I remember coming from Harris County, Houston, telling everyone I'm moving to Austin. I can't wait to move there, and being told, oh, it's going to be really difficult to get a transfer within PwC because the Austin office is so small compared to Houston and Dallas. But it was only so small for a few years after I first moved here. And then, it is a proper PwC office.
And
now.
It exploded.
Exactly. And I think it's because all of the businesses that have moved here, which I'm sure you're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
Soon,
we will definitely talk about that. Yeah. Just like the tremendous growth that's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another really surprising thing about the data, which people don't talk about, which is if you actually dig into the US Census data over the last few years, what's surprising is that Travis County, which is where Austin sits, has actually predominantly been led by international migration from Asia, from Europe, from South and Central America into the city. So if you look at April 2020 and 2024, domestic growth into Travis declined by 15,000 people.
Really?
And it grew by 50,000 international. individuals moving into the county. But when you look at the MSA and you take a step back, that's where you see tremendous international and domestic growth. So I think there's something there as well where, we talk about Austin, we think about Travis County, and we neglect all the other counties around Austin. So we've got Williamson County, so you've got Round Rock there, extremely popular destination, lots of affordable homes, lots of families. Hayes County with San Marcos, and then Bastrop and Caldwell, which really make up the MSA.
Right. Do you know, I'm curious, the international group that's moving here, I assume we have a lot of Latin Americans because Mexico and some of the other Latin American countries that we're seeing immigrants from. And I have good friends whose parents moved here from those countries.
Yeah.
Is it mostly coming from there? Or I know we're going to talk about this later. At least I wanted to talk a little bit about UT and all of the amazing research and other higher education type institutions. Like, are people coming from stereotypically what we would see like lower wage types positions from these Latin American countries, or are they coming from these Latin American countries as doctors or researchers, or are they coming from Eastern Europe, or where are they coming from?
Yeah, it's a great question, and honestly, I don't know. I think that the data there, it can be hard to find exactly who came from exactly what country and exactly what they were doing when they got here. So it seems to me it's probably a mix. And actually, I'll come back to that because when you look at the demographics in Austin and in Travis County, and we'll, we can get to that. It's changed quite a bit over the last 15 years, which would actually tell you a little bit something about the question you just asked. And actually, just to jump into it now, one thing that has been a question here for a long time is who came and who stayed and who's left. And, this is where people talk about replacement and whether Austin culture has become dramatically different. And I think this is where the critique is fairest, which is if you look at the most recent data, so from the city of Austin, they just did a study that they wrapped up at the end of, and they published a report in November of last year. They noted Austin's transition to younger, single higher renting earners as a proportion. It's become a city like that. And so when you look at that, you say, regardless of where people are coming from, they're coming from, whether they're coming from all over the world or they're coming from the US, it's that cohort that's moving to Austin. And I think that's also the feeling that you get when you look on Instagram or you hear the articles that it's a city of renters and young people, maybe they're working in tech and they're renting.
Right. We actually, when I moved here a long time ago and I lived around Town Lake, which I know you live downtown, so you probably see this more often, we would joke that the Town Lake Trail, which is this beautiful running trail along the river, which people call a lake who've been here a long time. I think now you're supposed to call it Lady Bird Johnson Lake still, even though it's the Colorado River. This running trail is stereotypically a lot of young people, and we would call it the pretty people loop.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes. Anyway, so I don't know if people still call it that, but that is the stereotype that Austin is young and attractive if they're out and running around and whatnot. And I buy it that that's the type of people Austin has attracted over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. Well, cities have had worse reputations. So, Austin should
it's
take
a good
that.
reputation.
But yeah, no, such a great question about, who's coming from what countries and, what they're doing here. And that one to me really surprised me. I really think that there was this reputation of just young people from the US coming into Austin and working in their tech jobs remotely. And it's been a much more diverse pool into Austin than I think we give it credit for.
That's true. Well, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit because we're going to talk about what the impact is long-term here. But did you see Governor Abbott's H-1B visa letter that he wrote about? Oh, my God. So, well, I'll give this in the somewhat bipartisan view that I can.
Sure.
Even though I tend to float on both sides. But Governor Greg Abbott, who is a governor of the state of Texas and has done a lot of wonderful things for the state. I mean, we have really flourished as a state under his governorship. He did write a letter saying that any H-1B visa personnel at Texas public institutions need to be reviewed and decided whether or not they should be kept.
Okay.
I think that's in the next few months, end of May or so, that review is supposed to happen. But more impactfully is that he said over the next 2 years, you have to receive written authorization of approval in order to hire someone under an H-1B visa to work at a Texas public institution, which is a really big deal and not great, in my opinion, if we want to be the kind of cultural hub for all types of education and learning and just continue to be a powerhouse in talent and education.
Yeah. And when will the decision be made about that at some point?
He's made it. Like this letter that he wrote is an order. It's a decree. I'm sure it will be litigated.
Sure.
So hopefully the courts will have something to say about this, because it's just a shame. We have so much talent, as I imagine you're going to talk about, coming from overseas here. And to just say, no, we only want these jobs to be held for Texans is so short-sighted, in my opinion. It's like becoming Japan, which, no offense to Japan, has not worked out for them long-term.
Lower immigration. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I did not know that. And I mean,
it was just like 4 days ago.
Well, and looking at the data, I mean, obviously Austin's a city full of H-1B workers at I would think mostly private institutions, lots of tech companies here. So certainly it would have an effect on who's coming and who can stay.
Yeah.
And really, when you look at Austin, and if you look at other cities over the last few years, a lot of the growth has been, for better or worse, in government and healthcare industries. So, clearly it would impact the job numbers as well in Austin.
It would, for
and
sure.
In Texas. Yeah, interesting. I know. I did not know that. Thanks for bringing that one up. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to that. But just to kind of flip back to the concept of kind of like who's come over the last few years. So I mentioned there was a study, and it's predominantly younger, single, higher earning renters were coming. So 1/3 of households are actually made up of people living alone in Austin now.
Whoa.
Yeah, which, wasn't the case. And talking about the city becoming more expensive, if you take household incomes as proxy for that, they grew in Austin by 21% between 2014 and 2024. So, lots of evidence behind what we're seeing and the vibe, if you will, of Austin and the data marrying. But I think what was interesting and really heavily talked about, and I'm curious what you think, is I think that there's a bit of a perception lag event going on here. When you look at the data and you look at the trends, a lot of it starts in the 2010s. And the city's been growing since then, the city, and before. But, if you look at 2010 to 2020, you see the same trends around city growth, around who's coming here, this transition to sort of a more expensive, higher household income city. And I think that we almost experienced it as a sort of like this visceral feeling of change. There was almost truly a perception lag event, in the sense that all of a sudden, this trend that had been happening for many years became so obvious, maybe because of the real estate that was being built, or maybe because of the whole Austin ethos that was all over the place. Like, everyone wants to live in Austin over COVID. Maybe it was the shuttering of some of the city institutions that happened over that time. But for me, that was one of the really striking things about the data.
That is striking and surprising. I would not have guessed, Lauren, that 1/3 of Austinites are living alone, basically. Right? And I was trying to think in my head, okay, how many students do we have across UT, St. Ed, some of these other universities that we have in Austin? And does that add up to enough to be marginally impacting that ratio? And I actually don't think it does. We have 1 million residents or so, I think, in Austin, right? And
about that.
I would imagine, actually don't know the stats on the latest enrollment at UT, but I'm pretty sure that it definitely doesn't get close to 1 million, but I don't even think, we're in the tens of thousands at UT. So I can't imagine that would have such a huge impact. And frankly, most students have roommates. So
Yep.
I think it must be, to your point, those higher wage earning folks who are living independently and moving to Austin. I was one of those.
Yeah.
You're one of those too. So we are part of the statistic.
We're part of the statistic. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I won't say that I wasn't affected in coming here by the fact that I think for many years, Austin has been this place where you want to spend the weekend. You want to go with your
Exactly.
friends. It's supposed to be
Yes.
fun, great food. There's all these things that attract people here for a few days, and then they want to stay. So I think that's definitely part of the myth of Austin that brings a certain group of people here.
It does. Well, what brought you here? Like, what was your main reason for coming to Austin?
I'm guilty of being one of those people who came here for the first time in 2018, just loved it, and was trying to figure out a way to come back. For me, it's just such a great city. I love the lifestyle, and I think one thing that's been interesting is when you start digging into it, the lifestyle, this whole Austin's lifestyle city, this has been a discussion and a thing since the 1940s. So it's something, and I feel like this ties back even to this data, and then, and just looking since 2010, what happened. I mean, this thing that you think was a new trend and just Austin starting in 2020 or 2018 has been going on for a long time. It's always been a core element of its culture, its identity. And how did you decide to move here?
I believe that. I was a little different, although I can definitely relate to what you're saying. I know lots of people, my husband included, who visited Austin and said, this is where I want to be, and I'm going to find a way to get here.
Yeah.
I was living in Houston and frankly got sick and tired of my coworkers saying, oh, I wish I lived in Austin. I was like, you know what? I'm going to move to Austin if it's that much better than here. And I had gone to university just north of Austin in Georgetown at Southwestern University, part of that Williamson County growth that you were talking about earlier. So for me, it was a bit of coming back to where I'd spent some years I really enjoyed.
Yeah. One other thing that's really fascinating about Austin that surprised me looking at this, and now when you came here, you came with a job, right?
I did, yes. And a lot of people don't do that anymore. They just come.
Yeah, exactly. And when I came here for the first time and worked here for 3 years, I came and I was working for myself, and I was working remote. And so I thought that in looking at the data, I would find this huge explosion of people who were working remote just in the last 4 to 5 years. But actually, so consider 35.4% in 2022 worked remote.
Okay.
If I go back to 2012, it was only 31.6%. So
whoa, we had that many people working remote in 2012.
Exactly, yeah. And
Whoa.
in 2002, sorry, it was almost 26%. So basically a fourth of the city has been remote since 2002, which completely, I think, debunks the myth that all of a sudden Austin's become this work remote city. And actually it makes me think there's been for a really long time this identity of, well, I want to move to Austin, I'm going to figure out how to do it, and I'm going to work remote for some other company that's based elsewhere.
That's so interesting. And I wonder if that ties into Austin being such a tech forward city.
Yeah.
Right? Like we have so much tech here in terms of industries moving or companies moving their headquarters here or have been headquartered here for decades. That probably has something to do with it. Do you think?
Yeah.
Is that correlated?
I wonder. Yeah. I've been wondering about it. I think there's a tech component. I think there's a cultural component where, it's the kind of person who wants to set up shop here and works remote and was able, the lifestyle thing. And to be honest, I also think it's a lot of the headquarters are still on the coast, and people have been moving here for a while and quietly flying to California or New York or Boston.
I actually know someone who is doing that with New York right now, just quietly living here, still has his apartment in New York and pretending. Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah, I mean, I have some friends who moved here 25 years ago, and they were flying to California for work. And moving here 25 years ago was actually quite rare.
For sure,
all things considered, not being from Texas, and so I mean, it started even then, the remote work. So that's an interesting part, I feel, of Austin growth and Austin growth data that people don't think about often. But one thing I do want to linger on is there has been a lot of criticism about who's come and whether it's changed the city, right? And when you look at, okay, it is transforming into a city of renters and maybe to a city who are younger, who are more mobile. It is a bit fair to say, I think, that maybe the growth has been a little less absorptive, if you will, and more extractive than it used to be, in the sense maybe people are here to, get something out of Austin, and then what's going to keep them here? Maybe they'll leave. And you have seen quite a bit of that, I think, over the past few years. And maybe for a lot of people, it did feel more extractive feeling over the pandemic than it had been before. And maybe that had a bit to do with this perception lag that everyone experienced, where all of a sudden the growth felt really material.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why, what is it about our mentality that makes us just not recognize until something, because you hear that with founders too, right? A startup has been working their asses off for 10 years and then they finally make it big and everyone thinks, oh, they've been like that the whole time, right? And they don't recognize, oh, this was actually a lot of work and we really planned to get to this phase. So I wonder if that speaks more to humanity in general.
Yeah.
Not to make this super broad, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even I think numbers are so abstract to individuals.
That's true.
You know how when you're trying to size things, people are like, okay, well, it's 12 Olympic pools, and I feel there's a little bit of that going on where the city slowly grows to 1 million people and you don't know, but when that institution that you used to go to and that's been around for 20 years shuts and a new high rise goes up and the downtown is totally different. Like, you experience it almost as a discontinuity between before and after. And me looking at this, I couldn't help but feel that the story from 2020 to 2024 in Austin was a little bit more of that. It was this, breaking of perception, maybe more so than what has actually happened. Although you can't fully conclude that, knowing obviously some of the people who came over COVID, maybe came here just for a little bit and it was a bit different, but there is a bit of that.
There is, for sure. And I wonder too, like you said, it's been happening a long time. People have wanted to live here. They come here like you did and they say, hey, I want to find a way to live in Austin and maybe I'm just going to work for myself for a while or hide out quietly. I think that makes a lot of sense to me, frankly.
I agree, didn't it? So moving on to another part of this discussion, which is really interesting, which is the reversion to the mean is well underway. What had happened over 2020, 24 happened, and arguably has stopped maybe even a year before 24, but now it's very firmly underway. So I looked in researching this at two things. I looked at jobs and I looked at real estate as sort of early indicators for activity. You could people count too if you wanted. But if you look at these two things, so if you look at jobs, growth is still high, but it's closer to the national average. So consider in Austin, non-farm payroll data from 2020 to 22 was 8% growth.
Okay.
23 to 24, it dropped to 2%. The US is about 1% right now.
Okay.
It's still growing 2 times faster than the rest of the US, really any period that you look at, but it's declined. And it's actually lower than some of the growth numbers that you saw from 2010 to 2020, if you take any individual year period. I mean, sometimes you're seeing 3% plus growth. So I think there's a bit of a correction that's underway in terms of jobs.
Oh, I would not have expected that.
Yeah.
I will say that is surprising to me, especially I would not have expected Austin to be so volatile either. Although I guess you could make the argument we are such a tech heavy city in terms of the companies that are headquartered here. And there have been a lot of layoffs, right? In tech, as much as we have AI pushing growth, there's still been a lot of folks losing their jobs. Does that have something to do with this? I'm just guessing.
No, I'm happy you brought that up. It's the perfect segue. So information jobs are down, tech jobs. I say information because if you look at, that specific code, the NICE's code, if you look at number 51, you'll look at tech jobs. So they grew here in our MSA 2, sometimes 3 times faster than the US from 2020 to 23. And shockingly, an amazing 14% growth, essentially.
Oh, wow.
In that particular cohort of tech jobs from 2020 and 22, which I think tells that story, right, of all the tech people moving to Austin.
Yes.
But now, to your point, it's actually contracting twice as fast as the rest of the US. So the US 23 to 24 was down 2%. Here in Austin, it's down 5%. Now, is that people getting laid off, which we know is absolutely happening in the tech industry, or is that people moving back to maybe the Bay Area?
It could be. I will say, I've done some work in looking at whether or not folks are being forced to come back to the office or work hybrid or any sort of office type schedule. And that has actually flattened out over the last few years. So you're not seeing that as dramatically. So I wouldn't expect that to be some sort of factor pushing folks to move out of Austin to California or New York or whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, it could be just that we hired too many folks, right? Like, we hired too many folks and now we have AI and they're not needed in the jobs that we hired them for. It doesn't mean that there won't be jobs created. That's what it frustrates me sometimes when folks talk about like, oh, we're having all these layoffs because of AI. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's like, yeah, right now, today, give it another year and you're going to have all these hires, if not even that long, to try to figure out, okay, we actually need to implement AI in all these ways. It's never perfect. You have to have people checking it. But I do want to go back to something which is kind of one of my biggest lessons learned today. And I know this is a joke between us of learning how to pronounce things. Would you said it was Nacy's?
Yeah.
Is that?
That's right.
Oh my God. I have been saying Nikes. Since I was like,
well, maybe it is
22.
Nikes, and I might have gotten it wrong.
No, I think I'm maybe it's a North American Industry Classification System.
Did I say it wrong?
So that's definitely, well, I have no idea.
I'm going to look it up on the spot.
I was going to say, if I've been saying it wrong, because I used to have to do it all the time when I worked in private equity.
Nakes.
Is it?
So did neither of us get it right?
No, neither of us got it right. So I was saying Nikes. You were saying Nakes. Okay, well, now we know.
It's one of these mysteries about government data, of which there are many.
Oh my God. Yes.
I've always heard it pronounced wrong, I'm realizing now. Nakes. Like cakes.
I don't think I'd ever heard it
That's
pronounced.
what Gemini says.
Wow. Okay. Well, either way, now we know that.
That's funny.
To your point, Lauren, to recap.
NAICS 51.
The NAICS 51 is showing, what did you say, that the U.S. is at 2% decline in information system. What is it called? Information technology?
Exactly.
Yes, information technology.
NAICS 51.
I had to stare at these, way too long
For
back
years.
in my analyst days. I had to classify tenants. I classified literally thousands of tenants into these NAICS codes.
NAICS. Well, the good thing about NAICS codes is you just get to look at them and you never have to pronounce them online, apparently.
Yes, You're just doing like drudgery that now an LLM can do for you within seconds.
Exactly.
It's crazy. But yeah, that's so interesting that Austin's down 5% compared to the 2% at the US level.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the AI layoffs are preempting. It's expectation based, probably, if I had to guess, more so than reality. Although, hey, if you're starting a startup today, I mean, you have much lower cost basis and need for people basis than you had before. But yeah, I mean, there was this over exuberant hiring. Well, when I look at the negative 5%, I think people have left Austin in the tech industry. I think there was the AI gold rush over the same period of time, and I think a number of people have left. And I think anecdotally you hear in the stories.
That's true, and I would bet that certainly places like the Bay Area, you see below the national average as well, and probably in New York, which I would consider to be our 2 biggest city competitors for tech.
Totally, yeah, completely agree. So that's jobs, or NAICS codes, as we've discovered. Looking at rents, so real estate, which obviously both of us know a lot about, have to talk about it. People love to talk about rent and houses here. There was a really interesting chart from basically the beginning of the year that was from a prop tech company called Reventure that was posted on X, and it showed the Austin, Texas rental market correction. I mean, cherry pick your data, but this data was fascinating because it was from 2017 to 2025 apartment median rents. And they basically dropped exactly to the mean line. If you had to draw a line from 2017 out to this year. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to show data, and I mean, frankly, true. So looking at the data, most people, it depends what source you look in, like everything in real estate, but rents here have dropped 15 to 20% since 2022. And I mean, most sources would tell you Austin, the MSA, has been leading or at the top of major rental corrections, contractions in the US since over that period.
That is interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised
Yeah.
too much by that. Like, at the same time, the nickname here is that the city bird of Austin is not actually the grackle, as a lot of people like to say, it's the crane. There's just constant construction going on downtown. And in general, the state of Texas and Austin especially is considered easy to build in. So relative to other parts of the country, when it was a difficult time to find alpha and figure out where they could build, people built in Austin. So it's not surprising that, I don't think we're terribly overbuilt, but it's not surprising that we probably did have a bit of speed relative to the rest of the country over the last few years, trying to get new development going on, and not as much in migration. Although we just talked about, we've been, I don't know, this isn't lining up for me, Laura.
That people are
we just
leaving.
talked about everyone's moving here. Like, people are not leaving. So what's the deal?
Yeah. No. I think they overbuilt. So some sectors are correcting now. So I have some good Colliers data. New apartment supply in Austin declined by about 1% Q4 2025. So, stop building. Industrial too, vacancy rate is starting to inch down. But they increased capacity dramatically over the last few years. So if you look at the data, maybe you saw 2 million square feet under construction for years. In 2021, it bumped up to 6 million, kind of hovered there.
Oh, wow.
So obviously these projects take years to develop, and you've made your decision based on the factors that you thought were most important. And you can't control if there's a contraction in tech jobs in any given year. But there's some signs that things are starting to correct, I think, to that reversion of the mean point. But there's some that don't. So if you look at office data, fascinating. So if you look for years pre-COVID, vacancy rates bump around 9 to 12%. Now they're up at almost 25%. The last number I got was about 24% Q4 2024. This is from a Partners Real Estate report. I mean, that's high. That's higher. That hasn't budged. That's a lot higher than what you see in, not a lot, but it's higher than what you're seeing in other cities that have big office footprints, or especially cities like, you could talk about San Francisco, you talk about Boston, talk about New York. It's way higher than the average in Austin. I thought that was so interesting that everyone built for this huge growth period, and maybe it just got a little exuberant. Not that housing stock and office stock won't be helpful eventually, but it may be a little too soon.
Possibly. I think you nailed it on the head earlier as you were making this point too, because you said we were building for all this tech, right? Yeah. All of the influx of tech companies and tech professionals. Anytime you put all your eggs in one basket, it's probably not a good idea. Yeah. So there's bound to be a correction in any industry over any period of time. And it was just a matter of time for tech to get hit and then Austin to be hit as a result, right?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, when you think big office towers and the vacancy rates still being high up, I mean, those are white collar jobs that are increasingly threatened by AI. Those are tech jobs where the number of tech jobs is declining. It's not typically a lot of healthcare. It's not typically a lot of, warehousing, industrials jobs. So For me, it's interesting to look then and say, did we build office towers for people, or, maybe aren't going to stop existing in as many quantities over time? What are they going to do with those?
It's tough to say. Yeah, I actually did. I'm skipping ahead to later because I did look up some stats here that I think are worth sharing while we're talking about this, because I was interested to see how big of a concentration tech is in Austin relative to some other cities.
Yeah.
So it's 25% of Austin's GDP, and this is significantly higher than Dallas or Houston, so the highest in the state. San Francisco, New York do not report. So Silicon Valley, Bay Area, do report, though, at the city level, how much of their workforce is in tech roles.
Okay.
And they're at about 22.5%. So even they are less than Austin, which I thought was really interesting because you would think Silicon Valley is going to be the highest.
Yeah.
At least much higher than Austin. And New York is 10%. So I didn't look up Boston. Sorry, I did not look up Boston too. But it's telling that it's so much larger than some of these other cities. And it makes sense that we're going to experience greater volatility as a result.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it gives a lot of credence to the point people make, Austin's a tech city.
Yeah, it is. The numbers do not lie here.
Do not lie. Yeah. No, fascinating. Yeah. I mean, when you moved here and just thinking like pre-2020, was it your feeling that the skyline was already exploding, or did that become more noticeable during the pandemic and in the years after?
That's a great question. I would say it wasn't exploding back in 2013. There was certainly construction downtown, but I'll give you an example that I think we've talked about before.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've been out on Rainy Street together, but we'll have to go sometime. When I used to go out on Rainy Street in my early 20s when I moved to Austin, they were houses. There was no high rise at all. Every single building, property on the entirety of Rainy Street was just a small single family bungalow. And I remember going to the first one that was converted into a bar. And so that just should hopefully give folks who may not be as familiar with Austin, Rainy Street now is just straight up skyscrapers. That is all of Rainy Street. And a lot of downtown Austin has moved east and is very tall. Whereas before it was even more centralized around the Frost Bank Tower. Which, if you don't know about the Frost Bank Tower, I'm going to share a little bit of Austin lore. Which I think I've shared with you. But the fun story about that one, it used to be one of the tallest buildings in downtown Austin. And it used to be that you could not build a building taller than the Capitol. Okay. So Austin used to be a lot shorter in general in terms of our structures. And the Frost Bank Tower was, when it was constructed, built, the architect went to Rice University and they considered themselves rivals with UT.
Okay.
So at the great unveiling of the Frost Tower at the very top, he decided to design it to look like an owl, which is Rice's mascot. So that when you look at the center of downtown Austin, and at the time, again, the buildings were a lot shorter, all you would see was this bright, beautiful owl in the night sky.
That's hilarious.
So it's pretty funny. And you'll see it if you're walking around downtown Austin and you look at the Frost Bank Tower. It definitely looks like an owl. And that's because the architect of the building went to Rice University. Anyway, fun fact.
That's a very Austin thing to do with an office tower.
I know. Yeah, they have to play some sort of prank and I guess keep it weird culturally.
Of course. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I think, what's interesting and I want us to take away from, this part of the discussion is really we're moving back from momentum-driven growth that happened over COVID, that was an aberration from the norm, back to previous fundamentals driven growth. But that growth was already happening way before we started talking about it in 2020. And but I think it's so interesting. And actually, maybe further evidence to your point on Rainy, I when I came here in 2018, it was still kind of itself. It's amazing how much it's changed in 6 years. I mean, they built quickly.
Very quickly.
They built quickly. But, and one thing, maybe maybe it's fair to say, maybe it's not, but I think one thing that we're not doing is going back to some Austin of the past. So the COVID years were unusual, but they were a deviation, you could argue, just from a growth cycle that Austin's been experiencing for more than a decade. And I think that was one important thing that I took away from looking at the data.
It is. I couldn't agree more. And we're attracting so many more high profile individuals to move here, which before was just like Matthew McConaughey, which, by the way, we will take it. We love Matthew McConaughey here. But I mean, Elon Musk having a presence, Joe Lonsdale, Joe Rogan, like these are big names to actually, and I know they're all guys. Sorry, I'm not naming any ladies here, but like those are big names to have attracted to come and make their home in the Austin area or have their headquarters here. Like, it's a really big deal to essentially win that against other cities in the country.
Yeah, it definitely keeps it in the news. It keeps Austin on the map. But I think Austin is on the map for a few reasons in terms of, destination to move to. So, it's interesting. It's like what chicken and egg sort of with some of our high profile residents. I completely agree.
Yeah, they wouldn't be coming here if the talent wasn't already here and they felt like there were opportunities from a real estate standpoint, from a business entrepreneurial standpoint, from a tax incentive standpoint. I mean, there's just a lot that we've done right.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to say about Austin. There's a lot to say about, I think, Texas too, and I know we'll explore a number of these topics too in future episodes. All sorts of around why certain things have happened here and certain things have grown. And well, I wanted to hand it over to you, and I wanted to kind of pause with the question and maybe just to set up a little. I mean, we've had this extraordinary bubble period over the last few years, but also as Austin's been growing for a long time, whether you like it or not. Some people don't, and changing, which some people love, some people don't. And so, to me, the question that sort of naturally arose looking at this data was, if you look out for the next 10 years, what kind of growth do we want? What do we think can compound here? And to add a little nuance to the question, I mean, what is sustainable compounding growth here? What is maybe the kind of growth that people say, yes, I feel good about this, not, all these people are coming and changing everything on me, whether you're or not.
Yes. And I get asked that a lot, having lived here for almost 15 years. Oh, the city must have changed so much while you were here. Like, is it good? Do you like it? Well, of course I like it, because if it's not changing, it's stagnating. If you think of just water flowing down a river and it stops moving, then it becomes a pond that gets filled with algae and just kills everything in the pond, right? Like, you do not want that happening. You want like a nicely flowing river that's just constantly changing.
Yeah.
So yes, change is very good. And in terms of what makes this growth sustainable, I characterize it in a few different categories.
Okay.
Diversification. And I really think this deals with the industry that we've talked about. So we're very tech focused today. The depth of talent and just research and education that we have here in the state and in Austin specifically. What we haven't talked as much about, we've talked about downtown a bit, but density, that's also a really big one, especially when we compare ourselves to Houston or like LA, where they're very sprawl specific. Development, we've also talked about real estate a bit, but just for anyone who's listening to this, Texas, you may or may not know, is historically considered much easier to build in. The permitting process is a lot easier. The planning process, all of that is a bit simpler than other cities in the state and even other states within the U.S. And then the last area that I would say is really critical is distinctiveness, which is culture, basically. Yeah. So I tried to keep it simple with the 5 Ds between all of those. So diversification of industry, depth of talent, density, development, and distinctiveness. And we can go into each of those a little bit more. But those are the areas I think we have to focus on in order to continue growing as a city.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, why don't we start with the first one? I love that you mentioned diversification. What do you think? What do you think should happen?
Yeah, well, we talked earlier about how so much of Austin's NAICS codes are focused around information technology and how most other large cities are not.
Yeah.
we need to be attracting talent and businesses and headquarters from industries that are not so tech focused. Now, how do we go about doing that is another story. There are people who are much more specialized in this than I am who can speak on that. But that is something that needs to happen here is we need to figure out a way to attract other folks. I will say that the natural next step, in my opinion, knowing that we already have a lot of tech here, is to have the folks investing in our tech come here. So have more of those financial services and then professional services that come to serve these tech firms that are headquartered here. We're seeing that some today with venture firms moving here, but they're still mostly headquartered elsewhere. So having more of that and more of that diversity. I did also look up the number of unicorns that we've had. So startups that have reached $1 billion, just to see like maybe Austin is very tech forward, but we're economically ahead of the others. We are not. So like the Bay Area, New York have 271 and 124 unicorns respectively.
Yeah.
Austin has only had 16. And I think that speaks to the nascent stage of our city compared to these other ones. But at the same time, like we need that money flowing in here in order to attract some of these other industries to serve the tech space that we have.
Yeah, it's a great point. For a long time, the criticism of Austin has been thinner capital stacks, fewer repeat founders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest piece of it here.
Yeah, and even compared to a city like New York, which, I mean, enormous city, but I did not know that was only, what do you say, about 10% of its jobs were tech jobs. Now that, it's punching quite above its weight from a percentage perspective.
Exactly. It really is. But that just speaks to how diverse New York is.
Yeah.
And everyone knows New York is diverse from other aspects, but I don't know if folks know how diverse it is from an economic standpoint. And I didn't until I was researching for this.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, to pause you there, because this is also something I was thinking about, and I'm curious to pick your brain on this. So Austin has a very long history of trying to attack the right industries to Austin. And we'll talk about another time, just since the 40s, trying to figure out what industry should we try to cultivate here, which I love because I don't know that I've heard as many stories from other cities about actively recruiting employers to move here. And some of the gimmicks are hilarious. So we'll have to talk about that another time. But if I had to give Austin a true growth story from an industry perspective, since at least the 70s, it's been a story of tech industry and tech growth here. And even I would go as far to say hard tech growth here.
Yes.
And so, people talk about this, but not as much, more now, but not as much over the last 5 years, that Austin should be a build and ship Atom city, not just write code, not just a bit city. And, I was thinking about it. I thought, like Exhibit 1, there's a ton of companies that grew here, especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like Adele, like Semitech, which is an amazing consortium, Samsung, that were here, that decided to come here. Huge microprocessor industry that was based in Austin and still is.
Yeah, Silicon Hills,
applied research at UT. So there's this whole ecosystem. And I thought two things that are super interesting about Austin as a, build Atom city, which, really should lean into. Texas has elements that the coast can't compete with. So ample land, power, water, low regulation, right? Like gopher regulation, and local supply chains to build and test fast. So, people were actually making panels, making things, electronic panels, welding, all sorts of things here around Dallas, around Houston, actual manufacturers. So you're close if you want to prototype. You're close to the talent, which arguably are a little further from if you're on the coast. And last UT. So, I don't think enough people know. Maybe we talk about UT next, but I don't think everyone knows. So UT is among the top 10 universities, typically in total research expenditures. It's one of the top applied science and engineering schools in the country, full stop. It's graduating twice as many engineers a year than an MIT or a Stanford.
Oh, wow, I did not know that.
Yes, and 80% of the student body is from Texas, so they're staying, and Austin is a fun city to stay in after college. A lot of college graduates actually stay where they studied for a period of time. So, I thought that's interesting. And I'm curious what you think about that, because I think we're having a renaissance a little bit about American industry and tech right now. And so, and already this dialogue is starting, and what a great way for Austin to decide to grow over the next few decades, if not to lean into natural strengths from geography perspective, from city perspective, from capabilities, people's perspective, in hard tech and, applied sciences, new energy, robotics, aerospace, defense, you name it.
I love that. That is such a great way to frame it.
Thank you.
No, it is. It's like, take advantage of what you have. The natural resources are abundant here from all the things you just listed. So we should be looking at that here and being proud of what has been built for sure. And it's funny how many folks our age especially don't know of UT and don't know how powerful UT is, versus today. I would suspect if you ask someone who's a recent grad, regardless of where they are in the country, if they thought about going to UT instead of, I don't know, some other Ivy League or similar, they probably did actually consider it, especially if they were majoring in computer science, given how strong UT has been for a long time. So anyway.
I recently learned the annual tuition, in-state tuition for UT is about $11,000 a year. So if you're from
Texas,
Texas
much cheaper, yes,
and get in, it's kind of what is that, 8 times less than an East Coast private university.
Yeah, well, and it used to be. I think they did away with this a few years ago, but I did tour UT when I was looking at schools, because if you were top 5 or 10%, I can't remember what it was, you could go tuition free.
Okay.
And maybe it was if you were it was valedictorian salute. I can't remember, but it was like, as long as you're in the top notch, you could go tuition free, which was really incredible and smart of the university to make sure that they're attracting top talent from across the state. And for you guys that don't know, the UT slogan is "What starts here changes the world," which is a pretty powerful slogan, I think. I did look this up a bit too, because I was just very interested in education being a differentiator for Austin and the state, and like you said, the natural resource that's pulling people here. I did not know this, but the state of Texas actually has more Tier 1 universities than California.
I'm shocked.
I was shocked as well. So the American Council on Education, I'm reading this because I want to make sure I get this right. The American Council on Education and the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching released a list just recently showing that 16 universities in Texas had reached the coveted Tier 1 designation versus other very populous states, California and New York, had 14 and 12 respectively. And last year, the year before when they announced this, they were tied with 11.
Really?
So it's recent that Texas has just jumped ahead.
That's fascinating.
I know.
And now
I
is
did not know
attracting? How do you make Tier 1 designation?
That is
research?
A great question. I did not look that up.
The
I should have looked that up. It's probably government, because it sounds like it's almost a lobbyist. But either way, I just think that there has been a lot of investment in UT and in some of these other surrounding institutions. And I know you were sharing with me the other day, if you want to talk about that NSF grant.
Oh, yeah. I was surprised to learn that Austin is the biggest UT is the biggest beneficiary of NSF, National Science Foundation dollars this past year.
I did not know that either. And that supercomputer, right?
And there's a new supercomputer that's going to be the biggest academic supercomputer, meaning many people will get time on it. It's not there are certain supercomputers that are more powerful from a compute perspective in California, but they're like a lot of DoD applications and things like that. But the one in Austin is going to be made available to thousands of researchers. And yeah, that'll be at UT this year.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also it's probably worth, if folks don't know, and if you work in real estate, you probably know this, but if in case not, University of Texas has one of the larger endowments in the U.S. as well. So the University of Texas Investment Management, corporate, it stands for UTEMCO is the short. Everyone just says UTEMCO. But UTEMCO's endowment doesn't just serve UT, it serves all Texas state universities, including our rival, Texas A&M. So, but the endowment that is funding a lot of folks coming to Texas for very cheaply in state or tuition free in some cases. A lot of UTEMCO's investments are in real estate in the state, as well as mineral resources and things like that too. So to your point, like it's kind of a self-investing vehicle here in our people, in our spaces, and in research too.
Yeah, fascinating. So I mean, I feel like that covers the depth of talent.
It does,
aspect,
yes.
Right? Or
yes.
I mean, invest in your universities, keep them. Austin's got a great one, and graduates tend to stay locally and build a highly educated labor force.
They do. I am worried, frankly, that Governor Abbott's H-1B visa statement is putting this at risk.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, we'll just have to see what the repercussions are down the road. But personally, I'm a little concerned about whether or not we'll still be able to attract top research talent, especially, I mean, we've been a tech leader. We don't want to sacrifice that, even though we want to expand to other industries.
Yeah, that's it. Well, and do you know to what extent that H-1B designation is going to affect the university as a state institution?
It is a state institution. So, yeah, I mean, I would
That's
imagine it will impact all the universities in the state, not just UT. Yeah. Yeah, and we've had some pretty big name folks. I was actually looking, I think it was Edsger Dijkstra, who was a Turing Award winner, and he was a professor at UT for a number of years. And he was the one who solved the shortest path problem, which is the shortest distance between two nodes, which is very important in a lot of graph languages today. And also he developed the first compiler for this programming language, which was a precursor to C. So like this guy was huge. Yeah. And he wouldn't have been here without the H-1B. Anyway, this is my little rant on concern about where we're headed.
You're 100% right about that. And especially, I mean, and then when you look at the data of who actually moved to Travis County, and
that's so true.
You know, domestic flight and international migration. I mean, you can't help but think, what other repercussions is it going to cause from a real estate perspective, from a city perspective, from a business perspective? No, it's a phenomenal question. Yeah.
Well, and to your point too, if we are having, and I know a lot of the flight away from the city is folks who can't afford the higher prices. And if all of a sudden we've built all of these high rises or office buildings to try to serve that specific population, which is single and has more disposable income, and then they stop coming here, that's not great.
Another gift for the real estate industry. Before we move on to real estate, I want to pause on one thing, because I want to just dig into diversification a little bit, because the last 2 years, I think there's been a lot of software-based startups and big tech that have moved into Austin. And I wanted to ask you, do you think there's a place for Austin as a software hub, and not as a software as a capability layer in hard tech like we just talked about, but as a product category where, really it is competing with Silicon Valley and New York and Boston?
I sure hope so. I mean, we really need that. I think part of that, it's to your point earlier, I think you said it well, it's a chicken or the egg problem.
Yeah.
We need to attract the type of people who are going to start those sorts of businesses here.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? We have a lot of talent so that it's easy to hire. We already have that. I'd say that box is checked to a degree, but we still need to make it easy for them to be able to come here and start these businesses and then stay.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, there's a lot of software companies today who still don't have any sort of HQ in Austin. There's still a lot of opportunity for that. So, yeah, I sure hope so. I don't know what that one little thing is that's going to make them come here, though. Do you? Or do you have any thoughts?
No, I was thinking about that one, and well, one thing that's kind of a funny counterpoint to the point I'm about to make is actually, if you look at Australian tech companies, they seem predominantly to locate their U.S. headquarters here. I mean, we've got Canva and Atlassian. If you start thinking about unicorn Australian companies, so with them as the exception, I don't know, because I think what the coasts have, and it was hard to unseat, is once dense, I think that some networks become self-sealing. So, and it's not just tech, it's elite law, it's consulting, venture capital, finance, but what matters is reputation, information flow, proximity to decision makers, the ability to just walk down the street or take a subway and meet with your whoever's financing your endeavor. And so, I think I think that's what makes it tricky sometimes for an Austin to break out in that category, because, and I think, as you were pointing to before, with some of the high profile people who moved here, they still have a dramatic presence in wherever they moved.
That's true. They do. Well, I would just say this as a pitch to anyone else who's considering moving here, who has a business in one of these areas that is not hard tech or some of the software that we already have. Why not be a big fish in a small pond? Like you could be if you came here, since we really need folks to lead in those areas like healthcare. Well, we have some healthcare, but like be a more dramatic healthcare leader, for example.
Oh yeah, or if depending on what you're building, the elements are here already, and come to Austin. And also I think with AI, you wonder if some of these networks are self-sealing forever, and people are already starting to talk about, well, we're not hiring as many analysts in X bank or for X program, or within law firms, within consulting firms. Maybe we won't need as many software engineers for this endeavor because they're going to be managing agents. So, you wonder, maybe it's not even a desirable thing, frankly, to compete with that if it's on the precipice of massive job loss, if you believe that to be true.
If you believe that to be true. That's the big if. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'd love to circle back to another point you made. So I'm curious to hear about your density and development arguments.
Yes. And the density we've talked about a bit already, just that whenever you're a city and you're going through a big phase of growth, you have the choice of, do we want to be a commuter city or do we want to be a very urban, dense city? Yeah. And it's not to say you can't be successful in both, but I do think, for example, Houston, our sister in the state, and I lived there and I loved Houston. I really enjoyed living there. I still have a lot of good friends in the Houston area. But I do think a challenge with Houston is it is so sprawling. Like it never ends. You can be in traffic for 2.5 hours and never get outside the city, so to speak. Versus other places like, New York is just a great example. It's like, it's literally an island. So that is a choice that Austin has to make and choose. Do we want density or do we want sprawl? And right now, I do think we're choosing density, especially with even the developments that are happening outside of downtown. If you look at Mueller, for example, on the east, it's like northeast Austin. For those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a very planned city development, public-private partnership with, I think Catalyst was the name of the developer, to ensure that it was not only dense, but also walkable and has retail as well as residential. So I think the city is being thoughtful in that way. I just hope that it continues and that the development continues in that way, because I think that is what sets us up to be a bigger city than perhaps just a sprawling city that doesn't ever top the charts.
No. How do you actively plan for growth in a way where you can try to avoid some of the negative things that have been happening in in the biggest cities in the US where people can't afford to buy, they can't afford to live, or they can, but it stinks. So, and people are leaving, right? People are leaving the Bay Area and New York and Boston for these reasons. How do you get ahead of that? And there's some promising signs here. The rules that were passed around, lot subdivision being a great example. But, and it's interesting because, when you think about sustainable growth too, I mean, you have constraints. So it's the decisions that you made before on what you were going to build and where, and then, maybe even constraints around like, do we have power to deal with this? Water.
That is a great point. Yes.
Land. Can we be the city that we want to be while maintaining who we were? I mean, people move to Austin because they want the lifestyle. So I can't imagine that an Austin city that had only tall buildings, no houses, no parks, can't get outside, no funky restaurants and honky tonks. That doesn't sound like Austin, and that probably eliminates a reason to come for a number of people.
I could not agree more. And I do know you wanted to talk about culture
a
little bit. And to me, that
is
is the perfect segue to talk a bit about culture. Because I moved here also because people kept saying, oh, I want to live in Austin. It was because it was greener than Houston. And not that there are parts of Houston that are green. Again, it's a wonderful city. I have lots of friends there, but it's much weirder here. And what does that mean? What does that mean to you? And how do you think culture going forward will be important to Austin's growth?
Yeah. I've been, I've thought a lot about this one. We can't do this one justice here, so we're going to need a full episode on it, and we will have one. But my mind just keeps coming back to the question, is there still a place for the arts in Austin? And underscoring this question is sustainable growth should include, one would think, a place for what Austin has been. And the problem is Austin has been for a long time this quirky, go-getter, low-cost creative city. And it's not as low cost and, some people would say not as quirky as it used to be before. And are you losing some of the sustainable growth of the existing industries here by the way that it's sort of dramatically changing from a cost and influx of people perspective? And, I think some of the creative industries that used to be here, and they were here because of low capital, low capital costs, right? Relative to their requirements and the informal networks and the people that came. Yeah, I think there is a real risk of losing them. And that in itself is a problem because Austin has a certain ethos that it's developed over the last 30 years that what happens if you lose it? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that yet.
Yeah, well, hopefully we never find out. But I will say, you have artists moving to New York all the time. You have people who move to these big cities because they want to be there and make it there. And why can't Austin be like that too? Sure, you're not necessarily going to be living downtown on a musician's salary, at least to start. But I'm pretty sure, and I know a lot of musicians have moved to places like Bastrop, and that's where you're seeing some of that out-migration that you're talking about from Austin to these suburbs. Historically, Austin just didn't have suburbs, but now we do. And we do because that's where some of these folks who may not be able to afford living in downtown unless they're under specific income restricted units, which we do have. And there are city requirements for development for a certain number of these per year. The city is trying to appease folks so that they can still stay. But I just think in New York, right, you'd live in Brooklyn or something like that. It used to be. Now Brooklyn is.
Parts of Brooklyn are still cheaper, but no, that's a great. If you take one thing that you have to wonder about is if you take density as a requirement for creative output and just ideas and people bumping up against each other, which you always have in New York, and there's always places to live and roommates to be had, and the cultural locus moves around over the years. Is Bastrop a sufficient answer, right? Or was there a reason? Was it everyone living in certain parts of Austin? And what happens when it's forced to dislocate? But in cities where they've been cultural nodes for a really long time, like New York. It's changed so dramatically over 100 years.
That's true.
What culture meant there and what arts meant there and where it was. And there's also, well, and maybe a different thing about New York too, there's always been this patronage movement that you don't have as much here in Austin. You have in Houston and Dallas, maybe I think it will grow in Austin, that attracts artists. Maybe in some ways it's maybe a first test of how durable and how much longevity this cultural movement in Austin has. And maybe it will change. Maybe it will find a way to reinvent itself. But it's an interesting question, and we certainly can't do it justice in a few minutes. It needs
No, we'll have to answer this one later too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you're talking about the arts, and there's just so much about what keeps Austin weird, even like the quirky side of it. I want to make sure we talk about too, with some of the festivals, and then we've talked about Leslie Cochran, some of the just people that have made Austin weird over the years. We'll talk about that later.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. So, I'd love to kind of wrap us. And before we wrap, I was curious, so what's one thing you're still chewing on, or one thing you took away from the conversation?
Besides the pronunciation of nakes.
Yeah.
Kidding.
I think I'm going to be second guessing myself on that one. For the rest of the day.
Anyway. Oh man, so many things. I think some of the stats that you shared, like we were just talking about, a lot of, I did not know that there was such a huge influx of folks coming from international backgrounds to Austin. And that, one, surprised me, and two, has me a bit worried with some of the changes that we've seen. So I'm still hopeful and optimistic that Austin will still have its day in the sun as it has, and continue to grow. But we just have to be very thoughtful about it as a city and creating the right incentives. And if you're in real estate, developing for what you hope will last, given all of the risks as well.
Yeah.
What about you? What's sticking in your head from what we talked about today?
Absolutely. Well, I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is Austin didn't have a breakout moment that was completely unusual during those COVID years. It didn't suddenly become something new. It was an exuberant period that was actually, the signs were there ahead of time. And so, for me, it's a little bit less of a question of whether the city will keep growing, but what kind of growth are we going to see over the next 50 years? The kind of growth that we saw over the last 30 might be very different. And what kind of compounds and gets sustained, and what quietly erodes over time, which is something I know we'll be circling back to. So, well, that's as good a place as any to start next time. And, thank you for listening, and see you all next time.